The ashes of World War II settled upon a world yearning for stability. The horrors of the conflict had left an indelible mark, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression and ideological clashes. Yet, from the ruins emerged a glimmer of hope, a sense that a new era was dawning. The war-weary nations, exhausted and depleted, recognized the imperative need for cooperation. A shared desire for peace and a rejection of the horrors they had endured fostered a fragile sense of unity. The post-war period witnessed the rise of international organizations dedicated to fostering dialogue and preventing future conflicts. The United Nations, established in 1945, embodied this collective aspiration for a more peaceful and just world. Its charter, a testament to the shared hopes of nations, outlined principles of international cooperation, respect for sovereignty, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. The world held its breath, daring to believe that, perhaps this time, things would be different. However, beneath the surface of this newfound unity, tensions simmered. The devastation of the war had reshaped the geopolitical landscape, creating a power vacuum that did not remain unfilled for long. Two superpowers emerged from the conflict: the United States, its economy booming and its military might unmatched, and the Soviet Union, its ideology forged in revolution and its territory stretching across continents. The stage was set for a new kind of rivalry, one that would come to define the latter half of the 20th century. The Cold War, as it came to be known, cast a long shadow over the nascent hopes for a truly united world. It was an ideological struggle, a clash between capitalism and communism, democracy and authoritarianism. It was a conflict fought not on traditional battlefields, but in the realms of espionage, propaganda, and technological competition. The threat of nuclear annihilation loomed large, a terrifying specter haunting the collective consciousness of humanity. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States found itself thrust into a position of global leadership. Its economy, strengthened by the war effort, dwarfed that of its rivals. Its military, boasting unprecedented technological prowess, stood as a guarantor of security for its allies. With this newfound power came a sense of responsibility, a belief that the United States had a duty to shape the world in its image. America's vision for the post-war world was rooted in its own ideals: liberty, democracy, and free markets. Its leaders, shaped by the horrors of fascism and communism, believed that these principles held the key to a more just and peaceful world. They saw the spread of democracy as both a moral imperative and a strategic necessity, a way to ensure stability and prevent the rise of totalitarian regimes. The United States embarked on an ambitious project of global engagement, providing economic aid through the Marshall Plan, forging military alliances like NATO, and promoting democratic values through diplomacy and cultural exchange. This proactive approach, often referred to as containment, aimed to limit the spread of Soviet influence and create a world order based on American principles. However, this vision of a US-led world order was not without its critics. Some argued that it smacked of imperialism, a thinly veiled attempt to impose American hegemony on the rest of the world. Others questioned the universality of American values, pointing out that different cultures and societies might have their own unique paths to development and prosperity. The Cold War, in many ways, became a testing ground for America's vision of global leadership. It was a period of both triumph and tragedy, of successes and setbacks. The US played a pivotal role in containing Soviet expansionism and promoting the spread of democracy, but it also found itself embroiled in costly proxy wars and faced with the moral complexities of supporting authoritarian regimes in the name of strategic interests. As the shadow of war receded, a sense of cautious optimism emerged from the rubble. The world, weary from conflict, seemed poised on the brink of a new era. The devastation of the war had not only reshaped borders and toppled empires, but had also ignited a yearning for lasting peace and a more just world. A shared sense of vulnerability, born of the horrors they had endured, fostered a fragile unity among nations. The industrially advanced nations, their economies battered and their populations depleted, recognized the urgent need for cooperation, rebuilding their shattered infrastructures and revitalizing their war-torn societies demanded a concerted effort, a shared commitment to recovery and progress. The pursuit of narrow self-interest, they realized, would only perpetuate the cycle of conflict and destruction. Meanwhile, in the colonial outposts of the world, a different kind of transformation was underway. The war had weakened the grip of European empires, igniting nationalist movements and fueling aspirations for self-determination. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, the seeds of independence were sown, promising a future where nations could chart their own destinies. This convergence of aspirations, both in the war-torn West and the burgeoning global South, created a fertile ground for the emergence of a potential world community. The shared experience of conflict, coupled with the desire for a more equitable and peaceful world, fostered a spirit of internationalism. It was in this crucible of change that a new global order began to take shape. As the world grappled with the challenges of rebuilding and redefining itself, the United States emerged from the war as a global power of unprecedented influence. Its economy, fueled by wartime production, stood as a beacon of prosperity. Its military, boasting unmatched technological superiority, projected an aura of invincibility. But it was America's ideals more than its material might that captured the imagination of many. Founded on principles of liberty, democracy, and self-governance, the United States presented itself as a shining city upon a hill, a model for nations yearning for freedom and prosperity. Its leaders, shaped by their own nation's struggle for independence and its unwavering belief in the power of democracy, saw it as both a moral imperative and a strategic necessity to promote these values on the world stage. This vision of a world order grounded in American principles resonated particularly strongly in Western Europe, where war-ravaged nations, seeking to rebuild their shattered societies and safeguard against the rise of new threats, embraced the promise of American leadership. The Marshall Plan, a massive economic aid program initiated by the United States, provided a lifeline to these nations, helping them to rebuild their economies and strengthen their democratic institutions. However, this American-led vision of global order was not without its complexities and contradictions. The Cold War, with its ideological divide between the capitalist West and the communist East, cast a long shadow over international relations, often forcing nations to choose sides in a global struggle that transcended traditional geopolitical rivalries. The pursuit of freedom and democracy, it seemed, would be a long and arduous journey. Section 3, The Shield and the Umbrella, America's Global Role. As the Cold War intensified, the United States assumed the mantle of leadership in the Western Bloc, providing both a military shield and an economic umbrella for its allies. The creation of NATO, a transatlantic military alliance, formalized this commitment, drawing a line in the sand against Soviet expansionism and reassuring nervous European nations that they were not alone in facing the communist threat. Under this security umbrella, much of the developed world flourished. American military power deterred large-scale conflict, while its economic might fueled global trade and investment. The Bretton Woods system, established in the aftermath of the war, created a stable international monetary framework, facilitating economic growth and fostering interdependence among Western nations. However, this American-led order was not without its critics. Some argued that it masked a form of neo-imperialism, with the United States using its economic and military might to advance its own interests and impose its will on weaker nations. Others pointed to the moral compromises inherent in supporting authoritarian regimes in the name of containing communism, arguing that such alliances undermined the very principles of freedom and democracy that the United States claimed to uphold. Despite these criticisms, the American-led order provided a critical measure of stability and prosperity for much of the world during the tumultuous decades of the Cold War. It also fostered the growth of international institutions, such as the United Nations, which, while often limited in their ability to enforce their mandates, provided a forum for dialogue and cooperation among nations. Section 1. The American Doctrine, Spreading Democracy. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States embarked on a mission to promote democracy worldwide. This endeavor was not just a strategic maneuver, but also a moral crusade rooted in America's foundational principles. The belief was that democratic nations grounded in the values of liberty and self-governance would be more peaceful and cooperative on the global stage. This vision guided American foreign policy and became a cornerstone of its international engagement. The Marshall Plan was a prime example of this doctrine in action. Through this massive economic aid program, the US aimed to rebuild war-torn Europe, not only to prevent economic collapse, but also to stave off the spread of communism. By fostering economic stability and prosperity, the United States hoped to create a fertile ground for democratic institutions to flourish. It was a blend of altruism and self-interest. As a stable and democratic Europe was seen as crucial to American security, the spread of democracy was not limited to Europe. The United States also extended its efforts to Asia, Latin America, and other regions. In Asia, the US played a significant role in the reconstruction of Japan, transforming it into a stable, democratic ally. Similarly, in Latin America, various initiatives sought to promote democratic governance, though often with mixed results. The American doctrine of spreading democracy was a double-edged sword, bringing both hope and controversy. Critics argued that the US approach sometimes veered into interventionism, undermining the very principles of sovereignty and self-determination it sought to promote. Instances of covert operations and support for authoritarian regimes in the name of containing communism painted a complex picture. The American doctrine, while aspirational, was often entangled in the harsh realities of geopolitical strategy and national interest. Section 2. Economic Interdependence, Building a Global Market. Parallel to its democratic endeavors, the United States championed the cause of economic interdependence. The logic was straightforward: economically interconnected nations are less likely to go to war. By fostering global trade and investment, the US aimed to create a web of economic relationships that would bind countries together in mutual prosperity. This vision was reflected in the creation of international financial institutions and trade agreements. The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 set the stage for this economic interdependence. It established the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, institutions designed to stabilize the global economy and facilitate reconstruction. The US dollar was positioned as the world's primary reserve currency, underscoring America's economic dominance. This system provided a framework for economic cooperation and growth, which was crucial in the post-war recovery period. Trade agreements further cemented economic interdependence. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, and later the World Trade Organization, WTO, aimed to reduce trade barriers and promote a free-flowing global market. The United States, with its vast market and technological advancements, stood to benefit immensely from this system. But it also believed that a prosperous global economy would contribute to global stability and peace. However, economic interdependence was not without its challenges. Disparities in economic power and development led to tensions and conflicts. Developing nations often felt marginalized and exploited by the global economic system, leading to calls for a new international economic order. The balance between promoting free markets and ensuring equitable growth became a contentious issue, highlighting the complexities of global economic governance. The Cold War defined much of the second half of the 20th century, shaping American foreign policy and the global order. The ideological battle between capitalism and communism was fought on multiple fronts, from direct military engagements to proxy wars, espionage, and economic competition. The United States, as the leader of the Western Bloc, played a pivotal role in this global struggle with varying degrees of success. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was a critical moment in the Cold War. The discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Through intense negotiations, President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev managed to de-escalate the situation, underscoring the importance of diplomacy and the dire consequences of nuclear brinkmanship. This event highlighted both the dangers and the necessity of strategic restraint. Proxy wars became a common feature of the Cold War, with Vietnam being one of the most notable examples. The US involvement in Vietnam was driven by the domino theory, the belief that the fall of one nation to communism would trigger the spread of communism in neighboring countries. The Vietnam War, however, proved costly and controversial, raising questions about the limits of American power and the complexities of promoting democracy through military intervention. The Cold War also saw significant achievements. The establishment of NATO and other alliances helped contain Soviet expansionism. The space race spurred technological advancements, leading to unprecedented achievements like the moon landing. The policy of détente in the 1970s, characterized by improved relations between the US and the Soviet Union, demonstrated the potential for peaceful coexistence amidst ideological rivalry. Yet the Cold War's legacy is mixed. While it prevented the outbreak of another world war, it also fostered an environment of perpetual tension and competition. The arms race, with its stockpiling of nuclear weapons, left a lasting impact on global security dynamics. As the Cold War came to an end with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the world was left to grapple with the remnants of this protracted geopolitical struggle and the challenges of forging a new order in its aftermath. The Westphalian system, born from the ashes of the 30 Years' War in 1648, has served as the bedrock of international relations for centuries. It established the principle of state sovereignty, the notion that each nation-state has exclusive authority over its territory and internal affairs, free from external interference. This system, based on a balance of power among states, aimed to prevent any single power from dominating the European continent and plunging it back into the chaos of religious wars. While the Westphalian system brought a measure of stability to Europe, it was not without its inherent flaws. Its emphasis on state sovereignty often trumped other considerations such as human rights and the responsibility to protect populations from atrocities. The system's focus on power dynamics while preventing large-scale wars also led to a constant jockeying for position among states, fueling arms races and creating a climate of mistrust. Moreover, the Westphalian system's emphasis on power politics often meant that smaller or weaker states found themselves at the mercy of their more powerful neighbors. The pursuit of national interest, often defined in narrow terms, took precedence over broader concerns of international cooperation or the common good. This created a system where might often made right and where the voices of the less powerful were easily drowned out. Despite its imperfections, the Westphalian system provided a framework for managing international relations for centuries. However, the 20th century, with its two devastating world wars and the emergence of new global ideologies, challenged the very foundations of this system. The rise of totalitarian regimes, the horrors of genocide, and the development of weapons of mass destruction exposed the limitations of a system that prioritized state sovereignty above all else. As the West emerged from the Cold War victorious, there was a sense of triumphalism, a belief that its model of liberal democracy and free markets represented the endpoint of history. However, this triumphalism masked a deeper unease, a recognition that the world remained a complex and fragmented place, home to a multitude of cultures, values, and aspirations. The notion of a single, universal world order modeled on Western ideals seemed increasingly untenable. Samuel Huntington's controversial thesis, The Clash of Civilizations, argued that future conflicts would not be primarily ideological or economic, but rather cultural. He posited that the world was divided into distinct civilizations, each with its own worldview and values, and that these civilizations would inevitably clash as they competed for power and influence. Huntington's thesis, while widely debated, underscored a fundamental truth: the world is not a monolithic entity, and different regions and cultures have their own unique histories, values, and aspirations. The Western model of liberal democracy, while appealing to many, is not necessarily universally applicable or desirable. The challenge for the 21st century, then, is not to impose a single world order, but rather to find ways for different civilizations to coexist and cooperate despite their differences. This requires a recognition that there are multiple paths to modernity and that Western values, while important, do not hold a monopoly on truth or justice. A truly multipolar world order must be based on mutual respect, dialogue, and a willingness to understand and appreciate different perspectives. Section 3, the cracks in the edifice, challenges to the post-Cold War order. The end of the Cold War, while ushering in a period of relative peace and stability, also exposed the fragility of the international order. The collapse of the Soviet Union created a power vacuum that was quickly filled by a multitude of actors, both state and non-state, each vying for influence and pursuing their own agendas. The international system, designed for a bipolar world, struggled to adapt to this new, more complex reality. The rise of globalization, while fostering economic interdependence, also exacerbated existing inequalities and created new challenges. The free flow of capital and information empowered multinational corporations and non-state actors, often at the expense of national governments. The global financial crisis of 2008 exposed the vulnerabilities of this interconnected system, highlighting the need for greater regulation and cooperation. The spread of democracy, once seen as an inevitable tide, stalled and in some cases reversed. Authoritarian regimes, often backed by powerful patrons, pushed back against Western-style liberalism, promoting alternative models of governance based on nationalism, religious fundamentalism, or a blend of both. The rise of China, with its authoritarian capitalist model, posed a direct challenge to the Western-led order, offering an alternative vision of modernity that appealed to many in the developing world. The international institutions created in the aftermath of World War II, such as the United Nations, struggled to maintain their relevance and effectiveness in this changing landscape. The Security Council, often paralyzed by vetoes from its permanent members, proved incapable of addressing many of the world's most pressing crises. The international system, designed for a bygone era, seemed increasingly ill-equipped to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. Section 1. The technological rise of the West, closing the gap. For centuries, the West held a monopoly on scientific and technological advancement. This dominance fueled its economic and military power, enabling it to project its influence across the globe and shape the contours of the international order. However, the latter half of the 20th century witnessed a seismic shift in this dynamic. Non-Western civilizations, once lagging behind, began to harness the power of science and technology, rapidly closing the gap and challenging the West's technological supremacy. This technological awakening was particularly evident in Asia. Japan, rising from the ashes of World War II, transformed itself into an economic powerhouse, its industries at the forefront of innovation in electronics, automobiles, and robotics. The Asian tigers South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore followed suit, embracing export-oriented growth strategies and investing heavily in education and technological development. China's emergence as a technological giant has been particularly striking. Once dismissed as a low-cost manufacturing hub, China has become a global leader in fields like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and space exploration. Its massive investments in research and development, coupled with a relentless drive to acquire foreign technology, have propelled its ascent, challenging the long-held assumption that technological innovation was primarily a Western domain. This technological rise of the West has profound implications for the global balance of power. It has eroded the West's traditional advantages, creating a more multipolar world where power is more diffuse and contested. Non-Western nations, emboldened by their newfound technological prowess, are no longer content to be rule-takers in a Western-dominated order. They are demanding a greater say in shaping the rules of the game, reflecting their growing economic and geopolitical clout. Section 2, Shifting Sands from Unipolarity to Multipolarity. The end of the Cold War marked the beginning of a brief period of unipolarity, with the United States standing as the world's sole superpower. However, this unipolar moment proved to be fleeting. The rise of new centers of power, particularly in Asia, coupled with the relative decline of American hegemony, has ushered in an era of multipolarity, characterized by a diffusion of power and a more fluid geopolitical landscape. This shift from unipolarity to multipolarity has profound implications for the future of world order. The old certainties of the Cold War era, with its clear ideological divides and predictable alliances, have given way to a more complex and unpredictable world. Power is no longer concentrated in the hands of a few superpowers, but is distributed among a wider array of state and non-state actors, each with their own interests and agendas. This multipolar world presents both opportunities and challenges. On the one hand, it creates the potential for greater cooperation and burden sharing, as no single nation can hope to address global challenges alone. The rise of emerging economies like China, India, and Brazil brings new resources and perspectives to the table, potentially leading to more equitable and sustainable solutions to global problems. On the other hand, multipolarity also carries the risk of greater instability and conflict. The absence of a clear hegemon creates a vacuum that can lead to competition, mistrust, and even conflict, as rising powers jostle for position and seek to assert their influence. The potential for miscalculation and escalation is heightened in this environment, as are the challenges of coordinating action among a more diverse set of actors. The transition to a multipolar world order is therefore fraught with uncertainty. It demands a new approach to international relations, one that recognizes the limits of traditional power politics and emphasizes the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual understanding. The ability of nations to navigate this complex and rapidly evolving landscape will determine whether the 21st century will be marked by greater peace and prosperity or by renewed conflict and instability. The 21st century has ushered in an era of, unprecedented interconnectedness. Globalization has woven together economies, societies, and cultures like never before. Yet, this interconnectedness coexists with a paradoxical surge in fragmentation and contradictions. The very forces that bind us together also expose the fault lines of a world order struggling to reconcile its universal aspirations with the realities of a multipolar landscape. One of the most glaring contradictions lies in the realm of values and norms. The post-Cold War era witnessed a surge in the promotion of democracy, human rights, and international law as universal principles. However, these concepts, often viewed through the lens of Western experience, have encountered resistance and reinterpretation in different parts of the world. What constitutes democracy, how human rights are defined and prioritized, and the role of international law in a world of sovereign states, these questions remain fiercely contested. This clash of values is further complicated by the resurgence of nationalism, populism, and cultural identity politics. The forces of globalization, while fostering economic integration, have also triggered anxieties about cultural homogenization and loss of national identity. This has fueled the rise of political movements that prioritize national sovereignty and cultural preservation, often at the expense of international cooperation and universal values. The result is a world grappling with competing narratives of order. The liberal international order championed by the West emphasizes democratic values, multilateral institutions, and the rule of law. However, this order is increasingly challenged by alternative visions, some rooted in civilizational identities, others in authoritarian models of governance, and yet others in a rejection of the very notion of a universal order. Another defining contradiction of the current global order lies in the disconnect between its economic and political dimensions. Globalization has created a highly integrated global economy, with goods, capital, and information flowing across borders with unprecedented speed and volume. Yet, the political structures designed to govern this interconnected world have struggled to keep pace. International institutions, created in the aftermath of World War II, often seem ill-equipped to deal with the complexities of a globalized economy. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, WTO, while playing important roles in managing the global financial system and promoting trade, have faced criticism for their lack of transparency, accountability, and responsiveness to the needs of developing countries. This governance gap is particularly evident in the realm of financial regulation. The global financial crisis of 2008 exposed the systemic risks inherent in a highly interconnected financial system with inadequate oversight and regulation. While some progress has been made in strengthening financial regulations since the crisis, the pace of reform has been slow and uneven, leaving the world vulnerable to future crises. The disconnect between the global reach of economic forces and the territorially bound nature of political institutions creates a fundamental challenge for global governance. National governments, often beholden to domestic constituencies, find it difficult to cooperate effectively on issues that transcend their borders. This creates a collective action problem where individual rationality pursuing national interest above all else can lead to collective irrationality, a failure to address shared challenges effectively. Bridging this governance gap requires innovative approaches to international cooperation. It demands a greater willingness on the part of states to cede some measure of sovereignty to international institutions, coupled with reforms that enhance the legitimacy, transparency, and accountability of these institutions. It also requires a recognition that effective global governance cannot be achieved solely through intergovernmental cooperation. It must also involve non-state actors such as civil society organizations, multinational corporations, and even individuals in a multi-stakeholder approach. The proliferation of multilateral forums and summits has become a defining feature of the 21st century world order. From the G7 and the G20 to regional summits and thematic conferences, world leaders seem perpetually engaged in a whirlwind of international meetings. While these gatherings provide opportunities for dialogue and photo ops, they often fall short of producing meaningful outcomes or addressing the root causes of global challenges. One reason for this is the often transactional nature of summit diplomacy. Leaders focused on domestic political calendars and media cycles often approach these meetings with a short-term, results-oriented mindset. The emphasis is on securing concrete deliverables, such as joint statements or agreements on specific issues, rather than engaging in deeper, more strategic discussions about the long-term challenges facing the international community. Moreover, the sheer number of summits and the breadth of their agendas often work against the kind of focused attention and sustained engagement required to tackle complex global issues. Important but less urgent issues can get crowded out by more immediate crises or by the need to present a united front on issues where there is less common ground. This is not to say that summits are inherently useless. They can serve as valuable platforms for building relationships, fostering trust, and facilitating informal diplomacy. However, to be truly effective, summits need to be complemented by a more robust framework for strategic dialogue among key actors. This requires a shift in mindset from a transactional approach to a more strategic one, focused on identifying shared interests, building consensus, and developing long-term solutions. Such a framework should prioritize quality over quantity, focusing on a smaller number of high-level forums with clearly defined mandates and a commitment to sustained engagement. It should also create space for informal dialogue and back-channel diplomacy, allowing leaders to build trust and explore areas of potential compromise away from the glare of the media spotlight. Ultimately, the goal should be to move beyond the illusion of summitry and towards a more meaningful and impactful form of international cooperation. The 21st century has inherited a world in flux, a world grappling with the legacy of a bygone era while confronting the unprecedented challenges of a rapidly changing global landscape. The old certainties of the Cold War have vanished, replaced by a multipolar world where power is more diffuse, alliances more fluid, and the rules of the game more contested than ever before. This new era demands a fundamental reassessment of how we think about world order. The Westphalian system, with its emphasis on state sovereignty and balance of power, while providing a framework for international relations for centuries, seems increasingly inadequate to address the complexities of a globalized world. The rise of non-state actors, from multinational corporations to terrorist organizations, has blurred the lines between domestic and international affairs, challenging the traditional notion of state sovereignty. The proliferation of transnational challenges, from climate change to pandemics to cyber warfare, has exposed the limitations of a system designed to manage relations among states. Navigating this complex and rapidly evolving landscape requires a new paradigm, one that recognizes the limits of traditional power politics and emphasizes the importance of cooperation, interdependence, and shared responsibility. It demands a shift from a zero-sum mentality, where one nation's gain is seen as another's loss, to a more cooperative approach, where nations recognize that their fates are intertwined and that global challenges require global solutions. This new paradigm must be grounded in a recognition of the diversity of cultures, values, and aspirations that shape the international system. The quest for a single universal world order, modeled on any one nation's experience, is not only unrealistic, but also potentially dangerous. A more sustainable and equitable world order must be one that respects national sovereignty while fostering cooperation, one that embraces diversity while upholding universal values, one that recognizes the limits of power while harnessing its potential for good. The United States, for all its flaws and contradictions, remains an indispensable actor on the world stage. Its economic and military might, while no longer unrivaled, continues to give it unparalleled global reach. Its ideals of liberty, democracy, and the rule of law, while often imperfectly applied, still hold a powerful appeal for many around the world. The question facing the United States in the 21st century is not whether it can continue to shape the world order, but how it will choose to do so. The temptation to retreat from global engagement, to embrace a narrow definition of national interest, is understandable in a world of complex challenges and seemingly intractable conflicts. Yet such a retreat would be a profound mistake, for it would not only diminish America's standing in the world, but also create a vacuum that would be filled by actors with less benign intentions. A more prosperous, stable, and free world, a world more conducive to American interests and values, requires American leadership. This leadership, however, must be exercised with humility and the recognition of the limits of American power. The era of unilateral action, of imposing solutions from above, is over. A more effective approach requires working in concert with allies and partners, building coalitions of shared interest, and leveraging the strengths of multilateral institutions. It demands a willingness to listen to and learn from others, to understand different perspectives, and to seek common ground where possible. America's enduring role in the 21st century is not to dictate the terms of world order, but to shape its contours by example, by diplomacy, and by a willingness to bear the burdens of global leadership. It is to be a catalyst for cooperation, a defender of universal values, and a champion for a more just, peaceful, and prosperous world for all. This is a challenging role, but it is one that America, with its unique history and enduring ideals, is uniquely positioned to play. It is a role that, if embraced wisely and courageously, can help to ensure a brighter future for generations to come.